You can increase your Capital One Savor card limit in the first 30 days of account opening. Capital One is supposed to be impossible to grow with, but people are proving that you can achieve limit increases insanely fast right now. That means lower utilization rates and higher credit scores when those new limits report. And I'll show you how 5 average people push their limits up to $14,000 within a few months. One even pulled off a $4,000 jump with a FICO score most of us wouldn't even say out loud, and I'll break down the 3 unpopular hacks they all use to make it happen. And by the way, if you want instant access to all of these hacks, plus 9 more secret strategies banks don't even want you to know, I put them all together in a free credit limit increase cheat sheet. Just hit the link below to grab it now. Now, most people think Capital One is stingy, that you've got to wait at least 6 months before they'll even consider raising your limit. But one person proved that's not always the case. After having their Savor card for just 1 month, a user was stunned to see Capital One automatically raise their limit. They weren't even planning to ask for a credit limit increase. The increase simply showed up in their account. Their limit actually doubled overnight from $3,000 to $6,000. And the craziest part is, not a single one of their other credit cards had ever done that with them. For them, it was a total surprise and proof that Capital One sometimes rewards Savor card holders much faster than anyone expects. Another person opened their Savor card with a baby $1,000 credit line. Two statements later, just 60 days in, they decided to roll the dice and hit the request increase button. Capital One shocked them by instantly bumping their limit to $3,000, just shy of the $5,000 they asked for. In just 2 months, their limit tripled. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Another user technically had their Capital One account for 6 months, but they only upgraded to the Savor card 2 months earlier. Within that short window, Capital One treated the card like the higher level product it is and gave them a 500% bump. Their limit jumped from $500 all the way up to $3,000 automatically without even asking. Now, those super fast success stories turn out to be pretty normal, but a wave of similar reports on Reddit and my FICO show that 2 to 4 months is the sweet spot for Savor card holders right now. One person opened their Savor card in February with a $3,000 starting limit. At the 4 month mark, they requested a credit limit increase, and Capital One nearly doubled their line to $7,000. And a few months later, they received an auto increase that pushed them even higher and pushed their limit all the way up to $17,000. So in just over half a year, their Savor card grew from basically a starter credit line into a 5-figure limit. And then another person started their relationship with Capital One 6 months ago with a basic platinum card, with a really a tiny $300 limit. 3 months later, they opened a Savor card and got a much stronger $3,000 line right out of the gate. But the growth didn't stop there. Just 3 months in, after opening that Savor card, Capital One gave them another $4,000 bump. That brought them up to a total available credit limit of $7,000. Now, here's the part that surprises people. The folks who are winning big credit limit increases aren't babying their cars. They're not obsessing over staying under that 30% utilization rule of thumb. In fact, many of the success stories come from people who were consistently running 50%, 70%, even 100% of their limit by the time the statement closed. For example, remember that first person I mentioned? The one who got a limit increase in just 30 days? They were absolutely hammering their Savor every month, running up about $2,700 out of their $3,000 limit like clockwork. And that's because it sends Capital One a clear message. It says, I need more room. When you keep bumping against your ceiling, the system sees that as a sign that you'd actually use a higher credit line. And another thing they did is they pay in full every cycle. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. Every single story where Capital One approved a credit limit increase also included on time full payments. People let big balances report, sure, but then they paid the statement off in full. And that's really what tells Capital One, I can handle this. Think of it like this. You're showing them two sides of the same coin. You show them high usage, so you want more credit, and then you're showing them perfect payment history, so you're a safe bet. That real combination is where the magic happens. And then third, they sustain that behavior over time. It's tempting to hit the request increase button after your very first billing cycle, but here's the reality. Those early requests almost always get denied. The real wins start showing up after 2 to 4 months of consistent behavior, heavy spend, on time payments, and then rinse and repeat that process. Now, here's something a lot of people don't realize. You can actually request a credit limit increase every single month if you want to. It's always just a soft pull, so there's no downside to trying. But unless you sustain heavy usage showing your Savor card living at the top of your wallet, you're probably going to see denial after denial. A person I mentioned earlier who got an increase in 2 months said this: I like my first two statements post as high as I could afford to pay in full, about 40% and 50% utilization. My second statement hit 2 days ago and paid in full yesterday. So essentially, the pattern looks like this: 2 or 3 months of pushing your limit, paying it off, and then asking. That's when Capital One starts saying yes. Now, there's two ways that increases come: it's by asking or by surprise. Manual requests have been successful as early as 2 to 3 months, usually, especially with the Savor card. And then the automatic increases usually happen later, often around the 4 to 6 month mark of steady use and repayment. Now, the smartest play is to ask early, and if they say no, don't sweat it. Keep using the card, keep paying on time, and let the system catch you at the next review cycle. Now, let's move on to these people's credit profiles, how they actually looked on paper. You should know that high scores don't guarantee credit limit increases. And honestly, this is the strangest part. It shouldn't work this way, but it actually does. You think a 760 credit score would make Capital One just throw credit at you, right? Well, not always. You can find people with perfect credit who hit the credit limit increase button and get flat out denied. Meanwhile, someone with a score in the mid 600s, a range where most issuers wouldn't even give you the time of day, can still walk away with a massive limit belt from Capital One. One of the people who got an increase at the 3 month mark had a 661 credit score at that time. That's a score many of us would be embarrassed to say out loud in a crowded room. But the pattern is clear. Capital One doesn't seem to care nearly as much about your score as they do about how you're actually using the card. So swipe it like it's your daily driver, pay it down, repeat that. That behavior has carried more weight in the real success stories than a 3 digit number ever has. Now, you should know for years, Capital One has had a reputation for bucketing certain cards. If you open a platinum or even a quick silver card with a low starting limit, you were basically stuck. No matter how perfect your history, that account lived in a box, permanently capped off. But with the Savor, it's a different story. More and more people are reporting that their Savor card feels like it's in the grower category, not the bucket. Think of it as being treated more like the premium Venture X card where aggressive use is rewarded with generous limit bumps. And I say this really explains why someone who started at $3,000 can see themselves at 7,000 or even 17,000 in under a year, while a platinum card holder from 5 years ago is still stuck at $500. The Savor seems to get slotted into that higher tier of trust. So if you treat it like, it's top of your wallet, Capital One is far more willing to open the purse strings. But you should really know about some of the risks and downsides to keep in mind. You will see some temporary score dips. Here's something a lot of people don't realize until they experience it. Running your card hot every month can make your credit score swing up and down wildly. When you're showing high utilization, say 70, 80, even 90% utilization, your FICO algorithm doesn't know you're about to pay it off. It just sees this person is using almost all their credit and your score takes a hit. Now, before you panic, utilization has no memory. The moment that you pay that balance down or off completely, your score bounces back up. But I know what you're probably thinking. So my score is going to dip every time I try the strategy. Well, yeah, but temporarily. That's why, you don't want to be applying for a mortgage, a car loan, or a new credit card while you're running this play. And you also should know that not everyone wins. And here's the other side of the story. And this is the part that frustrates people the most. Even if you follow the playbook perfectly, big spend, on time payments, rinse and repeat, you might still hit the button and get denied. Capital One's system is famously computer driven with complex algorithms. It doesn't care if you've been a loyal customer or if you deserve a bump. Sometimes it just says no. And I know what you're thinking here too. Wait, so I could do everything right and still not get an increase. That's exactly right. It feels unfair and it definitely is. But remember, a denial today doesn't mean a denial forever. The same account that gets shot down at month 3 might wake up with a surprise auto credit limit increase at month 6. The system has its quirks, but it generally does reward people who come back and keep trying over and over again. But listen, if I was you, these would be the 3 hacks I would use to force Capital One to give you an increase. First, you want to cycle your limit. So if your line is $3,000, let's say, don't just spend $1,200 and call it a month. Push it further. Spend up to the ceiling, pay it down mid cycle, then run it up again. What this does is signal to the algorithm: look, this person clearly needs more room, and they handle it responsibly. And yes, I can already hear you thinking, wait, won't that look risky? Well, not if you're paying it off. The pattern they reward is heavy use and then proof you can handle it by paying it off. Big paydowns, as they say. And then you want to hit 3 to 4 statements hard. If you want to stack those odds, treat the first 120 days like a test, because honestly, that's what it is. Capital One is watching closely to see how you handle their money. The people who win at this game usually go big for those first 3 to 4 billing cycles, charging heavily, paying it off, and then repeating it. And then another thing you can do is go big or go home. Now, here's where most people play it safe. They click the request increase button and then timidly, shyly ask for a $2,000 increase. Don't do that. Capital One actually expects you to swing higher. Asking for 3 to 5 times your current limit isn't greedy, it's strategy. So even if they don't give you the full amount, they will counter offer you. So you might ask for $10,000 and then they come back with $6,000. And you know what? You still won. Because let's be honest, if you only ask for $2,000, me and you both know that's all you would ever have gotten. It's almost like negotiating a salary. The bold ask gives you room for a better no. And when I approach Capital One, I ask for the max every time. That's how I was able to increase my Capital One credit limit every 120 days on average. And it took my limit from $15,000 all the way up to $29,000 in just 24 months. So yeah, definitely click on the next video here to learn how I did it. And thank you for watching.